Hello and welcome to the Huddersfield Town Preview Show in association with Sportsbroker. I'm pleased today to be joined by Stephen Chicken of the Examiner and Andrew Jones of the Athletic. How are you both doing this morning?
Good, thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you very much for sitting through the first intro I did where I completely flubbed my lines. We're talking today ahead of Burnley and Huddersfield in the FA Cup third round. Andrew, you're the Burnley correspondent for the Athletic, and Stephen, everybody knows you by this point as Town's I was going to say Athletic then, cover of the Examiner.
Outrageous.
I was
confusing us with a rival, rival.
Yes, starting a fierce rumour there. Andrew, if we come to you first, how are Burnley doing in preps to the game? Because I know Ian Wone came out recently and said you've only got 16 players available, which isn't news that anybody wants to hear. How's the sort of COVID situation going on at the club?
Yeah, it's not good. It's coming a frustrating time. Obviously, Burnley just before Christmas had a lot of games postponed because of other teams having COVID problems, and they seem to have avoided it all the way through.
And the snow.
Well, yes, and that one as well. Yeah, they seem to have avoided sort of COVID other than one or two cases. But, since they've come back, it's typically, they've now suffered from it. Sean Dyche won't be there for the first time in the dugout since he took over, which is going to be very, very weird.
Yeah.
I mean, just Ian Wone taking the press conference. Dyche has done, I think, since he joined, has done every pre-match press conference. So even that was different. But yeah, no, they are struggling. I think they've got four more positive cases within the playing staff,
okay.
And also with the coaching. So that's before the 16th. So that was from yesterday. I think they were doing another round of testing. So sort of fingers crossed. Everyone. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And they've got cases in the staff as well. Steve Stone, the first team coach, is going to be missing as well. So Ian Wone's going to be quite a solitary figure on the touchline. So it's a little bit difficult to know exactly how Burnley are going to line up, because we're not quite sure who even is available, who has had COVID cases, is coming back in, and now who will be missing. So it's probably a difficult one for Huddersfield to plan for, to be honest, because you just don't quite know what side Burnley are going to put out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Has Dyche discussed at all how he's going to be handling the game? Because it's something we experienced last week. It's something we had at the start of the season as well. Our head coach, Carlos, has unfortunately had COVID twice. So he missed Burnley at the start. He missed Derby at the start of the season, and our away trip in the last weekend to Blackburn. He wasn't there on the touchline either. And he does it, on the phone, but watching the stream at the same time. Is that what Sean's going to be doing, or has he got some other sort of concoction set up?
I mean, if he had his way, he'd probably be somewhere in some incubated room in the stadium if possible. But I think the plan, well, they're not quite sure how they're going to do it, but they're going to get the analysts, they're going to provide them with a stream so we can watch it, and then he's going to be in touch with somebody on the bench.
Okay.
They were joking yesterday about, probably it'd be unfortunate for the person who has him in the for the 90 minutes, because he's such an active coach, and he never sort of shuts up on the sideline, to be honest. But yeah, I think that's how they're going to do it, and then go from there.
Steve, like I was saying, Carlos has been missing a couple of games this season, obviously not his own choice. Have you noticed any difference to Town on those occasions? They've obviously been 2 away games and 2 draws, but the performance has been up there. Is it perhaps maybe a delayed decision or anything like that you've noticed? Because from where we sit, we've handled it about as well as we could have done.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos was talking about it at the press conference as well, and I think it's, as he said, it's difficult because you've got your coach on the phone in one ear, but then you've got the TV link, which is a minute behind, the online stream in front of you as well. So, as he said, the weird thing is that, like, you're on the attack, but you're hearing your coach is saying you're defending, and vice versa. So you can't really enjoy any aspects of the game as a coach. But from my perspective, no, I haven't particularly noticed a difference over the 2 games. It was Derby and Blackburn. Obviously, the Blackburn performance last time out was really good showing from Town, particularly obviously defensively, to keep a clean sheet against Blackburn when they're in the form they were in and away from home in very difficult conditions. And Town had to get to grips with those conditions early on. And Yeah, obviously looks like Carlos is going to be back in the dugout, although obviously Sean Dyche missed it out. But I think more important than Carlos being absent at the weekend or how that's impacted, and Sean Dyche then being absent and how that might impact Burnley. I think it's obviously what the players do on the pitch. I think any manager will tell you that there's only so much you can do once you've sent your players out onto the pitch. You spend all week preparing, you do your team talk, and then you send them out. It's over to them anyway. So,
was there much of an inclination from Carlos that the sort of side he might put out, or how seriously he's going to be taking, obviously, Premier League opposition?
Yeah, I mean, he's named a few that he says will play a part if all goes well in training, and obviously as he was quite keen to make the point himself that, as we know, things can change very quickly. So it's difficult times at the moment as Burnley are finding themselves. But he said that if Naby Sarr, Pippa, Jonathan Hogg, all being well with them, they'll play at least some part on Saturday. But beyond that, he was sort of keeping his cards close to his chest. Sometimes with the cup games, he's almost told us the lineup. He certainly did last year, but this year he was. He just said that he was going to field a competitive side, but I think that isn't much of a clue because you've got sort of. You've got two players for every position. And when we're looking through the squad the other day, it was like, blimey, there's like 17, 18 players here who, if you put them in the starting lineup for a league game, you wouldn't bat an eyelid kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see who he does go for and what we're talking about with a competitive team. But I'm as interested and curious as anyone.
What about yourselves, Andy? Has there been any sort of inclination, obviously with the limited amount of players that you've got to choose from, how seriously Burnley will be taking it? Because from having done some research, obviously ahead of the game and everything, it seems to be a competition, especially in the third round, where you go as strong as you can do and take it very seriously. It's not a competition where you tend to rotate too heavily. It's
a difficult one for Burnley because Sean Dyche makes no secret to the fact that the Premier League is the priority, and it sort of, in a way, can be when the game falls and sort of, the fixture backlog they've had in terms of whether players might be taken out to have a little bit of a rest. But they certainly take it, seriously, and they put aside that they believe they can win. It's usually, rotated to an extent, sometimes more heavily than others. I think they went to Fulham last season and there was sort of 9-10 changes, and they still won that 3-0. Obviously, they're going to be more restricted based on who is available. But there'll be a few changes. It's also an opportunity to give a few players sort of game time, especially given sort of how long it was without a game. Even just substitute appearances, players haven't been able to top up that fitness. So you're talking about some players who've gone, for 4 or 5 weeks without playing any football. So this is another opportunity to sort of give them playing time, but they've also, they have got quality. They're all Premier League players, so it's it's just whether they have to bring in any sort of the younger players and the under 23s or the under 18s if COVID gets any worse, or even just to fill the bench. But it'll still be a pretty strong side, I think, that they put out, because they've not really got many missing through injury. I think it's only Ashley Barnes, Connor Roberts is coming back from an illness, so whether he is sort of able to play, I'm not quite sure yet. But it's one of them. They will go out to win the game, and because it's one of them as well for Burnley, because they've not won. Well, they've only won 2 games all season in all competitions. They need something to sort of just boost that. Let's just start that roll and start that confidence flowing, because they are quite low in it at the moment because of the way the season's gone.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to hear. And Stephen, I'll be interested in your input on this afterwards. With the fact that you guys haven't played for a few weeks and you are looking for a bit of momentum and everything, just had that game against Leeds. Weird that weekend, actually, Leeds playing Burnley and Huddersfield playing Blackburn. It was like we'd done an exchange over the Pennines. It can be a positive or a negative. You mentioned the fact that they're not being able to top up their fitness, but they've had a rest there in a period where Town have played every game possible, where it was 3 games in a week, and it's the opposite side of it. So it tends to go, what you think is the better, having the momentum or having a bit of rest, because people say in the winter we need a winter break, players need a rest and everything, but you've presented it almost as if that's a bad thing. So it's strange, isn't it? We'll probably see on Saturday which one it works out being better for, but it's funny how it can be split both ways.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because you do, as you say, it's 80. I think they went 18 days without playing, which, you know, in what would be the, you know, the most chaotic month of the calendar, they sort of had most of it off. It does affect rhythm. It's sort of, especially defensively, and you can see that from the two performances they've put in since they've come back against Manchester United and Leeds, conceding 3 in both, that they need to build that defensive rhythm up, and, you know, they were starting to keep clean sheets, and that sort of, you know, gone a bit, and you do lose that match sharpness, I think, which can take a little bit of time to get back. But equally, you're right. I mean, the fact that they've had this break should probably benefit them more in the long term in terms of as the season goes on, because, you know, just the way generally fatigue builds up, Huddersfield players may feel that because they've not had that break.
Yeah,
they may start to feel that as the season goes on. Where Burnley, it'll probably benefit them because they're going to have games rearranged and they're going to have 3 game weeks, you know, but probably more spaced out than during the Christmas period.
Yeah,
so it might benefit them. I'd say it probably benefit them long term, but because they've not played and others have, they're in that rhythm. They've got that sharpness which Burnley have needed to build up.
Yeah, it's another one. What are your thoughts on it, Stephen?
I've done a bit of number crunching, to be honest, and I've tried
I'm excited for this.
I've tried to work out, like, I mean, it isn't really the case here because obviously they both played sort of Thursday, Sunday last week, but I've tried to sort of work out how much of a difference it makes for teams to go into games where they've had like a day's less rest or 3 days less rest, like basically any period of rest, less than their opponents in the championship. And I've looked at sort of the last 10 seasons worth of data, and I found that it makes basically no difference at all. It's a
great use of your time then. I'm
sure exactly.
Thrilled after that.
I mean, it was good to sort of prove the negative though, because I was wondering whether like other teams having postponements might play a part later in the season, but I think what I need to look at more maybe is like whether if you have a team with a run of fixtures that they need to make up, like Burnley might end up facing later in the season, like does that have an effect? But no, I mean, I think you know, it's professional athletes at the end of the day, and I think that obviously sort of fans and sometimes coaches like to talk about this and make it into an excuse, but I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's 90 minutes with professional athletes, and I think it probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference. It's, you know, it's always about what you do on the day, and I think sort of it's interesting, as you say, sort of both teams, neither of them have particularly great records in the FA Cup the past few seasons. You know, Town haven't been in a quarter-final since 1972, but even sort of more recently, you know, they've gone out sort of first time of asking last few times. And Burnley sort of, you know, considering they're a Premier League team, you know, Sean Dyche has understandably sort of prioritised the league over the cup. So I think it's going to be a big boost for either side. And obviously there's the historical wrinkle as well, that it's the centenary of Town winning the FA Cup for the only time, and the first game of that run was away to Burnley. So you know, there's if you want to look into, you know, I'm not what's the word,
superstitious,
that's the word. I'm not superstitious myself, so I don't read into that, but you know, those of you who are into sort of omens and fate and all of that might take something out of that.
I was going to ask you about this later on, Stephen. You've actually stepped on my point.
I'm sorry.
Sadly, it's fine.
Roll with it.
We're great minds and all that. Andy, what about yourself? Do you tend to go into any superstitions or omens or anything like that? Because, you know, the fact that it is 100 years since Town's only FA Cup win, and it did start in exactly the same place at Turf Moor against Burnley. Does that feed into it at all for you? Or do you think, you know, it's been 100 years, lads, come on?
It's got me a little bit more worried than I was. That's one of them, isn't it? It does seem, it's weird football, isn't it? And that there does seem to be these weird patterns that do emerge. But no, I mean, I'm not massively into that type of stuff. But, you know, maybe it will have, and who knows, maybe that may make me much more into it.
Is our home kit this season, obviously, as we've discussed previously, is in honour of that shirt that we won the cup in back then, and we will be wearing it at Turf Moor at the weekend, and there's plenty left in the mega store, so that's the plug done for that one if anybody wants one. I can tick that box. The one thing that I wanted to ask you two about, and we discussed it previously off air, is Burnley are quite an aspirational club, not just in the north, but for the size of club that both Huddersfield and Burnley are, the way that they've established themselves in the Premier League and been more than the sum of their parts, and that's by no means a criticism. That's, as I say, it's an aspirational thing. It's a compliment, if anything. Huddersfield obviously had our couple of seasons up in the Premier League previously, and it didn't go the way Burnley's has, even though Burnley had gone down and gone back up a few times before that. How have Burnley achieved what they've managed to achieve there? And is it something that you think is replicable by other sides of a similar sort of size?
I think it is, yeah. It comes down to just Burnley manage themselves really, really sensibly in terms of how it helped that they had Sean Dyche, who's obviously been, just done a superb job and probably developed players and got them playing at the best of their ability, and sort of have that collective group and that's helped them, sort of stay in the Premier League. I think that when they came up and went back down and then came back up again, as you mentioned, I think that was important because even just getting that first bit of Premier League money and then being able to, there was no panic when they went back down. There was confidence that they'd come back up, but it was about using that money sensibly, because when Sean Dyche came in, he talked when he came up in 2009 through the playoffs and sort of had that one season. When Sean Dyche came in, he sort of asked, well, where did all that money go and what was it used on? And it wasn't really used on much to benefit the club, basically. So that it was about sort of building not just the team, but also the structure. The training ground now, which we've been around for about 5 years now, I think is superb. It's top quality facilities, which are really needed, and it's about sort of just building the club side as well. But also managing, sensibly. The former owners who've now been, taken over by ALK, they put the club in a really good position financially, just by being smart. And I think that the issue is that the last few years, the lack of money on transfers and the squad's stagnated a little bit, and that might cost them this season. But before that, because they got themselves into a position where they didn't need to sell players anymore, because they used the ability to sell players like Michael Keane, for example, to help fund and help improve the squad to get up to a Premier League level to then be able to sustain themselves in it. But that they've sort of stopped selling players, and therefore the money's not coming in because of the players that they've got are quality and they don't want to lose them. And that sort of stagnated them in the market a little bit. And also, the former owners were setting the club up, to sort of be sold. LK have come in, tried to add to the finance and had a really good summer window in terms of who they brought in. But it's one of them. If Burnley do go down, for example, one of the factors will be that the squad has sort of been allowed to stagnate. They've not had Sean Dyche hasn't had the money to evolve it. But generally, what they've done to this point has been, superb in the way that it's sort of, it's about having the right manager, it's about having the right players, the right environment that he builds up, and he's done a phenomenal job in doing that. But it's also about managing it financially as well, and making sure that you've got the ability to add when you need to add. And you're not spending, because they don't spend loads of money on players, and the record transfer is still £15 million, which in the for them to have been in the Premier League for so long is quite remarkable. Yeah,
it is, and that's all really interesting to hear, Stephen. Just before we wrap the show up, is all that sort of interesting to hear from a town perspective? Is all that sort of things that you can see our club being able to achieve, and not only be able to achieve, but currently be doing in such a way that is scalable should the Premier League become a possibility going forward. So we've got to bear in mind that the season we're having in December, we're sat sixth at the table at present. It might be slightly fanciful, but it's not out of the realms of possibility.
I mean, Town have been in the Premier League very recently. So I mean, we know it's not sort of, pie in the sky, and the club have been quite clear that the aspiration longer term, sort of the 5-year plan is to be a top 30 club, which would sort of put you in, you would hope at least put you in maybe that sort of West Brom Burnley bracket where you may be sort of bouncing around a little bit, and hopefully I think the idea is to try and get a spell in the Premier League. I've put a few seasons together like Burnley have done, but yeah, I mean, I think obviously the money is what it is. I think Huddersfield Town are never going to be competing with a Man City or a Newcastle United. I think the model is much more along the lines of a Burnley or a Norwich or whoever you might want to name on that front, and being a little bit more self-sustainable, living within your means. And it isn't the most exciting or glamorous thing at times, because you're not sitting there talking about going out and signing £20 million players every window. But I think that, as Burnley have sort of shown, Norwich and others as well, Swansea previously, although they lost the way a bit for a while, I think sort of having a cohesive identity through the club can take a club a very long way. And it almost doesn't matter whether you're a free-flowing, passing, attacking side like Swansea used to be, or whether you're keep it tight and be rugged and be, not to use too many cliches about Burnley's style of play, but I think there is a lot of that about them. And they've been successful with it, so you can't really knock it too much. Yeah, exactly. And I think having that sort of philosophy through a club can take you far, and being consistent with those things and having it through your academy and etc. And Town are trying to do those things, so we'll see where it gets them. As you say, I think probably a bit too premature to be talking about it this season, but I think we've seen, with the improvement they made this season at least, that as it stands, they seem to be on the right track to move in that direction.
We'll see about how premature it is in a couple of months, Stephen. Touch wood that it's will look silly. But thank you very much for joining us, Andy. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow at Turf Moor, and the same to you, Stephen. And thanks ever to Sportsbroker for making the show possible.